I want to tell you today about a very dark time, a time of sadness, a time of horror, a time when things were so bad that you thought they absolutely couldn't get any worse. I'm talking about 1993, the year that a Eurodance musician from Germany named Haddaway released a song asking the age-old question, what is love? Baby, don't hurt me no more. It is a terrible, horrible, awful, atrocious song that spends 4.5 minutes of him saying over and over again, what is love? Baby, don't hurt me no more. But there is something that this awful piece of music has in common with our readings today, namely that very question, what is love? We have a lot of ways to talk about love, and we usually only really talk about it at weddings. Think of all the times you've heard a pastor talk about love, and I imagine that a lot of them have to do with weddings. Namely, you've got your 1 Corinthians 13, which talks about all these characteristics of love. But it doesn't really give you a full picture. It just talks about what love is like. That love is patient and kind and not envious and not boastful. But it doesn't really nail down what love truly is. There's also Colossians 3 where Paul tells us to put on love. And we all kind of go, okay, we're not quite sure how that works. I know how to put on a shirt, but not quite sure I know how to put on love. And we get a little bit closer when we talk about Ephesians chapter 5, but that one's a little bit problematic because it tends to be used incredibly out of context. But we'll talk about that in a minute. Now, all of these verses are great verses about love. I've used them myself at weddings. And I think it's really unfortunate that we don't talk about love in church like we should. And that's pretty much my fault. But we rarely talk about what it means when we say that God loves you. We just kind of say it. And we go, oh, that's nice. It's nice to be loved by God. But we don't really talk about what we mean. Now, Ephesians 5, it's that one verse that people who, let's give them the benefit of the doubt. Well-meaning people use this verse in a number of terrible ways. Because it's the bit that starts out with, wives, submit to your husbands. Now, I'm going to give folk the benefit of the doubt that they're well-meaning people trying to do right by God. But this verse has a bad habit. They read that bit and then they stop. And they go, wives, submit to your husbands. And that's it. They don't read the next part or the part before it or the part a little bit ways down. They just stop there. Because the next part is, husbands, love your wives just as Christ loved the church. Okay, that's helpful. So how did Christ love the church? He gave himself up for her to make her holy, cleansing her by the washing with water through the word, and to present her to himself as a radiant church without stain or wrinkle or any other blemish, but holy and blameless. Are you starting to figure out what love is? If it's not obvious, how about 1 John chapter 3? Let's just smack you over the head with what love is a little bit more. This is how we know what love is. That Jesus Christ laid down his life for us. Do you need it again? How about John chapter 10 that we read today? I am the good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. The reason my Father loves me is that I lay down my life only to take it up again. No one takes it from me, but I lay it down of my own accord. I have the authority to lay it down again, and I have the authority to take it up again. This command I received from my Father. The love that God has for us is more than just what we mean when I say things like, I love bacon, or I love TV, Or, I love soccer, but not so much right now. I actually, when I was writing this sermon, I was anticipating a victory, and it didn't happen. But the love that God shows us is more than that. It's a love that gives itself. A love that drives the person who is doing the loving to sacrifice himself. God gives his life for us, and that is the standard of love. So what is love but God giving himself for us? And there's so much that's part of that. Because there's so much more involved with being the good shepherd that lays down his life for the sheep than just laying down his life for the sheep. He guides us and leads us. He walks with us in dark valleys. He provides for us. He makes a home for us. All the things that we read in Psalm 23. He also heals us when we're in need, forgives us, saves us, all the things that we hear from Acts chapter 4 and 1 John chapter 3. And of course, most of all, he dies for us, and then on the third day, does what? Rises again, defeating death itself. And this is really good news, right? We can stop here and be really excited. There's only one problem if we stop here. Remember what John said after he wrote, "This is how we know what love is, that Jesus Christ laid down his life for us"? Do you know what the next bit was? And so we ought to do the same for others. He says, if anyone has material possessions or sees a brother in need but has no pity on them, how can the love of God be in that person? Dear children, let us not love with words or speech, but with actions and truth. This is the core of what we are called to do as Christians. If we're pledging to follow Jesus, we're called to do for others what Christ has done for us. We're to lay down our lives, just as Christ laid down his life for us. And to do all of this, even to people who we think are enemies of God. Because if you remember right from Romans 5 and the crucifixion itself, Jesus died for the same people who killed him. From the cross, he looks out at the people who are putting him there and says, Father, forgive them, they don't know what they're doing. That's how big God's love is. And because of the love he showed us, our call is to love like that. To love as Christ loved us, giving ourselves, our time, and our possessions. Sound familiar? And giving what we are, all that we are, in service to others. All because God first loved us. Because God loved us enough to give us salvation freely. We're called to share his love just as freely with all those around us.